Before we dig into anything though, I'm wondering if you might be able to just give us an idea of your role at Scouts Australia, and also what learning looks like within Scouts Australia as well.
So I guess the starting point there being my role in Scouts Australia, my paid role is as the National Compliance Manager for the Registered Training Organisation. I'm also a volunteer, but that aside, that paid role means that I manage the training organisation. There are about 60 volunteers who also contribute to that, but I'm the one paid employee. So that definitely puts me across what's happening within the qualifications and that formal education side. But you actually asked about what the training's like. Well, the training, I would say, is very different. So that's where we come into a very big difference, because Scouting worldwide is an educational movement. As an educational movement, it's about developing youth to contribute to society. That to do that, we need lots of adults who volunteer to develop those youth. So there's a lot of training of those adults. So Scouting in itself is an education movement. Often not seen that way, but it is an education movement worldwide. I think the big difference that needs to be considered is we use a lot of non-formal education in Scouting. Now, I look at non-formal education and say, well, what is that? Unfortunately, I can't describe non-formal education without defining formal or informal education. So that is a key aspect of this. The formal education, let's think national qualifications frameworks, schooling, universities, formally recognised qualifications. Informal, I just happened to learn it along the way. I don't really know where I picked that up. I learnt that. The non-formal is sort of somewhere between the two of those. It is a defined, clear curriculum outlined of what will be achieved in a fairly flexible manner, but not recognised like those school, universities or vocational education qualifications are. So it sits somewhere between.
Fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? So there's so many complexities within Scouts then, where you have this non-formal, like deliberate but non-formal learning, the formal learning which takes place, I guess, through the RTO component, and then a whole bunch of informal learning that's just happening as you're going along. Wow, it's how do you recognize all of that? Like, how do you manage all of that?
That's the tricky bit. So we look at it in two ways. We've got the youth program, so how we develop the youth, which is very flexible, fairly open-ended, and it is, while there's defined criteria, defined things that can be done along the way, it is very open-ended, very flexible, and goes from 5-year-olds to 26-year-olds. So you really are looking at a broad range of experience and knowledge and age groups. And then we've got the adults, anything from 18 to 98, that are helping develop those youth. So the difference in our adult training is highly defined, very clearly outlined, very clear definition as to what needs to be achieved by when to be registered as a leader in particular sections and to be able to do the job of volunteering even. So the great example of that, and you asked about how does the formal work, well, the Registered Training Organisation recognises it provides formal qualifications, but it does it entirely out of recognition of prior learning. Now, a lot of that we know what that learning has been. So I referred to the adult training a moment ago as being very clearly defined. We've got very clear online learning, very clear face-to-face workshops, what the curriculum is, what's in it, and beyond that, some very clear guidelines about what must be achieved as practical experience before they can be signed off as a leader to take responsibility for those young people and help them in their journey. So having that really clearly defined training that is towards a scouting outcome, the scouting outcome being you'll be a leader.
Right.
But that very clearly defined outcome gives us very clear information to say, oh, units of competency in these qualifications have very clearly defined outcomes. Clearly defined outcome A from scouting, clearly defined outcome B from a unit of competency. Where do they line up? Where's the gaps? Is there any difference? How can we make it work? And therefore, we then use that scouting outcome as evidence towards qualifications.